Welcome to the Lumenverse. Before we begin, are you listening to this while it's raining, or is it sunny where you are? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoy our stories, please remember to like and subscribe. Now, let's begin. And so, in a small, forgotten farming town, stood a vast, untamed field, its tall grass growing unhindered, blanketing the soil that had succumbed to years of negligence. Local folk whispered about it with hushed voices, unwilling to share their true thoughts on the strange sight that unfolded there. For in that forsaken field, during the hours when the darkest shadows reigned, a glowing lantern danced in the windless air, gently moving as if carried by a phantom wanderer treading upon a path only the unseen could perceive. The farmers of the area spoke of an unsettling fact. If one dared to fixate on the hypnotic lantern for too long, they would notice its slow, steady motion. With stealthy grace, it would traverse the vast field, navigating the tall grass as if hunting a prey, and as it drew closer, the true figure carrying it would come into stark clarity. A tall, emaciated man emerged from the shadows, garbed in tattered old clothes. His features remained concealed, except for a ghastly grin that extended far beyond the confines of human proportions. Those who managed to tear their gaze away from the enchanting lantern before it completely ensnared them usually escaped unscathed. However, those who dared to observe the swaying object for a moment too long often faced dire consequences. People who watched the glowing lantern for an extended period would inexplicably disappear, leaving behind homes with untouched beds and neatly placed boots in the entryway. Soon afterward, the lantern would return, accompanied by another one, and the chilling dance would persist, signifying the addition of a new companion to the unseen traveler. Among the crumbling buildings of a neglected village stood a small yet resilient stone chapel, its aging frame bearing the brunt of time's relentless passage. Despite the dilapidated state of the roof and the shattered window panes, the chapel's bell tolled unfailingly every Sunday, though no earthly being had ever been witnessed performing its toll. A peculiar phenomenon unfolded at night. Travelers passing through the area sometimes claimed to hear melodious voices reminiscent of a full choir emerging from the chapel. The harmonious sounds carried through the air, as if carried by the wind itself. The whispers of the villagers echoed in the air, speaking of an ancient revelation, a hidden chamber deep beneath the chapel, where rows of calcified skeletons were discovered, their jaws still agape as if locked in perpetual song. In the present, whenever the ghostly choir rose in the stillness of the night, a faint shiver would ripple beneath the ground, accompanied by the mournful toll of the cracked bell. It was said that if one listened too intently to the eerie melodies, a curious sensation would take hold, compelling them to hum along without conscious effort. The eerie voices of the unknown, echoing from beneath the earth, served as a chilling reminder that not all supernatural occurrences were confined to holy sanctuaries or open fields. The haunting began innocuously, with a knock, soft yet persistent, as if it could be dismissed as a mere breeze, perhaps a stray branch or a loose shutter. However, the rapping continued insistently, as if an unseen presence was desperately seeking entry. When you peered through the window, the reflection that stared back at you was your own, pale and somewhat discomfiting, while the rain cascaded down relentlessly outside. In the darkness of the night, some unfortunate souls swore they caught glimpses of something sinister, an elusive outline that appeared in the reflection on the window glass, only to vanish when they glanced back over their shoulder. Others described catching a glimpse of eyes eerily staring inward from the darkness, positioned far too high off the ground for a mere mortal to reach. Regardless of the details, one chilling fact remained consistent across the tales. The relentless knocking would never cease, refusing to subside until the window was finally opened. Those who attempted to resist usually found themselves in vain, as the relentless rapisted through layers of cloth or paper they tried to use to muffle the sound. Even when the glass finally shattered, no outcry was heard, leaving the house oddly silent and devoid of life. The vacant dwelling, still bearing signs of habitation, remained untouched, with the books lying open and the bed still retaining the warmth of its previous occupant. On a rainy night, an observant passerby could be drawn to the faint sound of knocking emanating from the yawning empty window. Within the dense woods, a peculiar forest existed, one veiled in secrecy and not marked on any map. The trees grew in an unnaturally close proximity, their branches woven together like tendrils yearning for connection. An unsettling stillness held reign over this eerily silent place, as it echoed with the soft, almost imperceptible whispers that gently filled the air. These were not the whispers of the wind or mere echoes. Instead, they carried the distinct tone of speech, yet they spoke in a language so ancient, so foreign, that understanding remained tantalizingly out of reach. Versing deeper into the woods, the peculiar shapes of faces materialized from the roots of the trees, each one carved with mouths wide open. It was from these twisted visages that the mysterious whispers emanated, as if each bark-engraved face were alive with its own secrets. As you knelt close to one of these faces, an uncanny phenomenon unfolded. The whispered voice that had been previously decipherable suddenly began to mirror your own, as if in a chilling conversation with yourself. On the storm-battered shores, a solitary lighthouse stood, defying the wrath of the sea. The beam, once a beacon of hope and guidance, had laid dormant for nearly a century. Yet there were whispers of its light still piercing through the impenetrable fog. The lethal currents and jagged rocks, the legend spoke of the treacherous beacon luring unsuspecting seafarers to their doom. The tale of the last lighthouse keeper echoed through time, a man who clung to his duty, tending to the light and bell, long after the world had forgotten him. In the midst of vicious storms, the townsfolk claimed they could catch faint glimpses of the lighthouse keeper through the dome's glass, diligently carrying his lantern, pacing slowly within the structure. But when a bolt of lightning struck, the tower collapsed into ruin, and the keeper's body remained lost to the elements. Reports from local fishermen spoke of witnessing the lighthouse signal flaring back to life once more, accompanied by the restless pacing of a shadowy figure. The vessels that strayed too close to the cliffs inevitably met their fate, succumbing to the jagged rocks, with their entire crews mysteriously vanished. Some sources of light were meant to guide our path, offering illumination and direction in the darkest moments. But on rare occasions, there were other sinister luminescents, beckoning us closer only to lead us astray. And then, there were those inexplicable instances where the threat wasn't the roaring sea or a monstrous creature lurking in the shadows, but the very darkness that seemed to dwell within the walls of our homes. Within the confines of any dwelling, hidden corners lingered, where illumination failed to reach, and shadows formed like opaque curtains, shrouding unseen corners and obscuring them from view. The chilling tale was whispered about a man who once lived alone in a small apartment, his existence seemingly ordinary in every respect. However, one particularly eerie night, as he prepared for bed and extinguished the lights, something unusual caught his attention. There, in the dark corner of his living room, a darker patch of shadow emerged. It took on a distinct shape, transforming into a tall silhouette resembling a man, standing with uncanny stillness. The man's bewilderment deepened after his initial discovery. Despite blinking his eyes and turning on the light, only to find the corner empty, the unsettling sight persisted. Each night that followed, the shadow-like figure returned, silently standing in the corner, a consistent and unnerving presence. Although the entity never ventured closer, its persistent presence created a constant feeling of being watched. The man found his fear realized on one fateful night, when he awoke in his bed to find his room pervaded by an unusual darkness. The corner, shielded from even the faintest light of the street outside, harbored a shadowy presence, silently awaiting. Tragically, the man never resurfaced, leaving behind nothing but unsettling rumor sensations. Those who later inhabited the apartment reported an uncanny feeling of heaviness when the corner was left in darkness, as if the lingering entity still remained, forever in wait. However, what lurked in the shadows wasn't the only sinister force that pursued their prey. Within the picturesque countryside, a peculiar road extended for miles, winding through rolling fields and endless turns. Despite its conspicuous absence on any cartographic records, unsuspecting drivers would inexplicably find themselves navigating its streets. This town appeared normal at first glance, with its carefully lined rows of houses adorned with rocking chairs on quaint front porches, and amber-colored street lamps casting warm pools of light. Yet as motorists left their vehicles to stretch their legs, subtle oddities would reveal themselves. The eerie atmosphere deepened as every single residence displayed eerily darkened windows, devoid of even a flicker of life within. However, an inexplicable feeling of unease would strike those who ventured deeper, compelled to believe they detected the subtle movement of curtains, as if something had retreated from sight. Further down the eerily quiet streets, faint sounds echoed through the air, the soft bark of a dog from one corner, children's laughter from another, and the occasional whisper of footsteps reverberating ear across the deserted sidewalks. Despite the apparent absence of any inhabitants, the town felt distinctly alive. Those who ventured deeper into the unsettling town seldom re-emerged, with a few exceptions recounting harrowing encounters. They had witnessed pale, flickering shadows of individuals in porch chairs, lining the darkened windows, and haunting the once cheerful streets, silently watching them with unblinking eyes. And once one caught a glimpse of these spectral entities, the road seemed to transform into an enigmatic loop. Drivers drove in circles, finding themselves forever drawn back to the town, as if the very route itself had transformed into a labyrinth, trapping them indefinitely. Long-haul truckers recounted their experiences with chilling regularity, often late into the night while traversing desolate highways. During those long stretches of isolated driving, one chilling phenomenon seemed to plague these weary travelers. In the dead of night, as they drove in the enveloping darkness, they would suddenly sense a presence occupying the passenger seat beside them without any recollection of how it had appeared. The figure would remain eerily still, silently observing, rarely revealing their face. Only glimpses of their figure could be caught in fleeting moments, their appearance often obscured. With a disquieting sense of their inhuman nature, the terrified truckers employed various strategies to confront this harrowing phenomenon. Some attempted to ignore the presence in their passenger seat, while others opted to stop the vehicle and forcefully fling open the passenger door, trying to expel the unwanted hitchhiker. Yet, each time the seat sat empty, appearing utterly ordinary. What was truly chilling was this: upon resuming their drive, the seatbelt would still be found fastened, as if the ethereal passenger never truly vanished from the vehicle, and instead lingered in the very fabric of the cab itself. In the midst of a bustling city, whispers circulated of a particular subway station that defied the norm. Commuters spoke of instances where their train mysteriously deviated from the regular route, halting at a platform uncharted on any map. The station stood in a state of desolation, with crumbled tiles and corroded signs bearing witness to its abandonment. The air was heavy with the distinct scent of damp stone, and at the end of the lengthy tunnel, a distant light flickered faintly, as if signaling another train patiently awaiting nearby. As the train began its departure from the deserted platform, passengers who chose to remain aboard reported an unsettling detail. In the moments before the doors closed, they claimed to catch glimpses of movement on the platform. Pale figures dressed in ragged, damp clothing stood in the shadows, resembling individuals who had endured an eternal, relentless storm. The silent figures stood and watched as the train moved away, their presence a haunting reminder. Some passengers, in those fleeting moments, even claimed to see their own faces staring back at them through the train's windows, an unsettling mirror image. Rumors about an enigmatic hotel circulated among travelers, with whispers about an otherwise ordinary-looking establishment along the highway, concealing a secret within its walls. The neon sign flickered incessantly, a testament to the passage of time, and the parking lot displayed cracks and fading paint. Upon checking in, certain guests were handed the key to room 6, a peculiar occurrence since the hotel purportedly possessed only 5 conventional rooms. The clerk avoided direct eye contact, as if burdened with the knowledge of a hidden truth. The peculiar room 6 harbored a more unsettling secret. Anyone who dared to sleep within its chambers would find themselves plagued by eerie voices whispering through the vents and doors slamming in the distance. In their dreams, guests would witness their own figures standing outside the window, a chilling specter against the obscurity. Awakening in the morning would often unveil an ancient key, caked with rust and deformed, resting on the bedside table. Attempting to check out presented a disheartening response. The clerk would simply shake his head, leaving guests trapped in the perpetual grasp of room 6. The uncanny phenomenon commenced with a subtle yet unsettling occurrence. Individuals, while engaged in a mundane act of oral hygiene, would briefly glance into their bathroom mirrors. As they went through the motions, brushing their teeth, a disconcerting divergence would manifest. The reflection would continue its action a moment longer than anticipated, stubbornly holding on to the act. Most individuals would dismiss the uncanny experience, attributing it to mere fatigue. Yet over time, these unsettling incidents repeated with increasing frequency, casting an air of unease. The uncanny occurrences grew increasingly pronounced as time progressed. Observers would notice discrepancies in synchronization. The reflection would lag behind, blinking after individuals' own blinks, displaying a disconcertingly delayed response. Furthermore, the reflection's smile began to exhibit an unnatural wideness, hanging onto an exaggerated grin even after the individual had resumed a neutral expression. Those who relentlessly fixated on the reflection would encounter the most unsettling development. It would stop mirroring their actions, instead adopting distinctive motions, leaning closer to the mirror, and fixing its gaze upon the observer. The unsettling experience reached its horrifying peak as the reflection's lips moved independently, uttering words that did not align with the individual's own speech. These whispered murmurs carried promises, warnings, and threats, each one reverberating within the confines of the bathroom. Tales whispered about the dire consequence of lingering too long, of inching forward until the reflection beckoned forth. Every urban sprawl concealed a singular library, distinguishable by its simple and enigmatic mandate. Visitors were permitted to enter at any hour, even after the clock struck midnight, but speech was strictly prohibited. Those who ventured through the quiet halls during the late-night hours perceived an otherworldly ambiance. The faint hum of buzzing lights, intertwined with the musky scent of weathered paper and damp stone, and a peculiar undercurrent of decay pervaded the atmosphere. In the eerie silence, soft sounds manifested between the stacks of shadowy shelves, footsteps that lacked approximate source, the quiet rustle of pages turning with unseen hands, and the library harbored more than just ordinary volumes, books that possessed a haunting whisper as they rested on the shelves, calling out to visitors with eerie knowledge. Their contents contained intimate details of individual lives recounting events that had already transpired, and others that were yet to unfold. The library's enigmatic librarians remained hidden, observing silently from hidden corners, their eyes fixed in an unblinking stare. These spectral attendants did not hinder the perusal of those peculiar books, yet the knowledge within came with a dire consequence. In the pre-digital age, late-night radio once served as a reliable companion for weary listeners, yet whispers persisted about a hidden realm within the static of the airwaves. The faint, hissing static that lingered between stations held a secret waiting to be unveiled. As the ears attuned to the subtle noises, faint syllables emerged, sometimes forming words and names, while other times, distorted fragments of laughter and sobs echoed through the audio. There existed one particular radio station that remained elusive, invisible to regular radio dials, yet with careful tuning, between two powerful frequencies, a weak but clear signal could be detected. As the listener remained captivated by the haunting narratives that unfolded, the pull of the station's peculiar voices deepened, like an irresistible allure. They spoke of tragedies that hadn't yet come to pass, foretelling the details of accidents and fires, and even mentioned the names of individuals destined for an imminent demise. One night, the chilling broadcast took a sinister turn as the voices began to narrate the listener's own life story with uncanny precision. The tale culminated with a distinctive knock echoing through the airwaves. In the stillness of old homes, the natural sounds of expansion and contraction, pipes groaning, and floorboards creaking typically filled the night air. Yet, there were occasions when these familiar sounds took on a mysterious quality, as if something else was stirring within the walls. It started with the soft, almost imperceptible scratching, reminiscent of fingernails slowly dragging along the wallpaper. Upon pressing an ear to the wall, the noise would abruptly cease, only to resurface later, louder, and seemingly nearer. The house carried a haunting past, as tales circulated about a mysterious resident who had vanished without a trace, leaving behind all of his possessions. Locals whispered that the man had been consumed by the house itself, neither alive nor dead, his essence now intertwined with the very structure that once held him. Those who dared to linger within the shadowed halls by night would find themselves accompanied by the unsettling sound of rhythmic breathing, echoing with a macabre harmony to their own exhales. Peering closer, one might detect odd indentations on the walls, shaped like hands and a face frozen in a silent scream. A stretch of rural highway was renowned for its uncanny and confounding properties, colloquially known among truckers as the road that loops. The journey commenced like any ordinary drive with two faded lanes framed by towering trees. However, an inexplicable phenomenon would take hold. Despite relentlessly driving forward, the fuel tank never diminished in quantity. Mileage markers repeated themselves, and the identical billboard emerged once more. As the journey persisted, an unsettling realization dawned upon travelers. The radio abruptly grew silent, and cellular signals were swallowed by the surrounding silence. Truckers shared harrowing stories about the eerie figures lurking within the shadows of the nearby forest, just beyond the reach of the vehicle's headlights. These spectral entities would keep unnerving pace with the moving vehicle, their appearances manifesting in the rearview mirrors. Unsighted, they never receded from sight. Rumors circulated suggesting that the sole way to escape the loop was to halt the car and step outside. Yet when the traveler complied, an unsettling stillness engulfed the air. A haunting silence prevailed, interrupted only by the ominous sound of approaching footsteps, originating from the dense woods encircling the vehicle. Mirrors held a strange quality, faithfully displaying reflections that mirrored our physical selves. Yet their true nature extended beyond surface appearances. Through hushed whispers, a tale circulated in quiet towns about a peculiar young girl who spent endless hours fixated on her mirror. She neither primped nor groomed, merely fixated on her reflection with unwavering intensity. The girl would sit still for so long that her parents would have to intervene, physically tearing her gaze away from the looking glass. The girl's absence at dinner time raised concern, prompting her mother to investigate. Unsettlingly, she found the chair overturned and the bedroom window locked, with no sign of her daughter. However, when she glanced at the mirror, an unsettling sight met her eyes. The girl's reflection remained within the glass, sporting an unnerving smile. Tales circulated about an unsettling spectacle occurring when one stared diligently at their reflection for an extended period. Minor discrepancies became apparent, such as blinking out of synchrony or exhibiting a delayed reaction. As the focus intensified, the reflection would draw nearer, flattening its forehead against the glass. Beyond the audible realm, whispers found a way to reach the depths of one's being, reverberating within the very structure of bones. When fixated upon the mirror long enough, subtle aberrations manifested, as the reflection failed to mimic one's blinking actions. Should blinking transpire at an inopportune moment, the mirror's surface would fall silent, retaining an unbroken gaze. And upon a subsequent glance, the glass would be left eerily bereft. Those who peered into the mirror soon realized that certain reflections concealed secrets far more sinister than their own likenesses. The peculiarities of apartment living abounded, marked by muffled noises through thin walls and unexplained footsteps overhead. Amidst it all, murmurs circulated about the enigmatic figure christened the man on the balcony. After midnight, he materialized consistently beneath the residence directly above, standing eerily still within the shadows. First glance, the man resembled a fellow neighbor, with a tall, lean frame and modest attire. However, when brave souls ventured outside to investigate, there was no trace of his presence. Each time observers ventured back inside and rechecked the balcony railing, the man would be a little closer, his attention consistently fixed on the upper balcony. Residents initially dismissed his presence as an elaborate prank, but one bold individual decided to call out to him, leaning over the balcony and raising his voice. The figure beneath responded by craning his neck upwards, although to the astonishment of witnesses, the night remained eerily silent. However, despite the absence of auditory evidence, an unnerving consensus permeated among the onlookers. Each individual was utterly convinced they had heard a blood-curdling scream reverberating throughout the entire building. The morning after the unexpected incident, the man who boldly called out from his balcony was strangely absent. His room remained undisturbed, the door locked from inside, with only his balcony door left open. Strangely, 10 flawless fingerprints marred the railing, as though someone had scaled the structure. Neighbors whispered ominously, cautioning each other to refrain from acknowledging the man on the balcony, to never step out when he appeared, and absolutely never to let him realize they noticed his unwavering gaze. It seemed some watchers weren't meant to be observed, while others yearned for attention with an unnerving fervor. Every train following the conventional schedule appeared on the timetable, but there was one train that materialized without advance notice. Lacking illumination on the timetable, it announced its arrival with the shrill screech of brakes and a low, mournful horn. The train carts were archaic, bearing faded paint and fractured windows, with lights that flickered in an erratic rhythm. Upon boarding, travelers noticed an immediate peculiarity. Passengers sat in an unsettling silence. Their hands rested on their laps, faces void of expression, and their gaze fixed resolutely ahead, as if awaiting something with a haunting patience. The train defied conventional norms, bypassing standard stations and instead offering glimpses of landscapes unfamiliar. Forests presented trees that leaned inward as though eager to reach the train. Cities teemed with glowing buildings devoid of inhabitants, and enigmatic tunnels unfolded with countless doors embedded in their walls, inexplicable for subterranean settings. Some claimed that the journey would return the traveler eventually, albeit with a sense of disorientation and fragmented recollections. Yet there were those who spoke of an ongoing journey, an unending ride accompanied by perpetually silent passengers, formerly similar to the newcomers. They called it the Sentinel, a towering skeleton of a lighthouse standing tall on a jagged cliff where relentless waves crashed continuously. Its beam sliced through the mist like a spectral sword, yet it wasn't meant to operate anymore. Locals whispered in hushed tones that the lighthouse had been decommissioned 30 years ago, abandoned after its last keeper vanished into the night. No replacement came, no one tended to its upkeep, yet on certain eerie nights that elongated bone-white beam would glide across the dark sea, scanning the waters in a deliberate, methodical rhythm, as if seeking something, or someone. I was navigating down the coastal road, the relentless rain turning night into a dense fog that swallowed everything beyond headlights. Then, abruptly, the narrow, blinding beam of the sentinel pierced through the misty darkness, momentarily overwhelming my vision. When I mentioned this encounter to an old man in the next town over, he paused in his stirring of the coffee. "That light ain't for ships anymore," he murmured. "Then who's it for?" I inquired. He regarded me silently, his face betraying a hint of unease. The tales of the sentinel were many. Some fishermen claimed to have seen shadowy figures within the lantern room, their silhouettes outlined by the pale beam as they stood, their hands resting against the railing, and gaze directed seaward. Others reported the haunting sound of a low humming, echoing from the cliffs, neither the wind nor the waves, but a voice, whispering in a language unknown to their ears. One woman shared that curiosity had compelled her to investigate the open door of the lighthouse, its spiral staircase slick with sea spray. A pungent aroma pervaded the air, a mixture of rust and blood. The incessant downpour, it always seemed to weave itself into the tales that were told here, almost as if it held an uncanny awareness. Now, the story unfolds within the confines of an unremarkable apartment building, where some inexplicable presence within its walls longed for its existence to be acknowledged. I thought I had come across a hidden gem when I relocated into my apartment, an ancient brick structure adorned with creaky wood flooring, offering a rent that didn't drain my wallet. Those vents, though, were the only peculiar feature. Tall, black iron grates that slightly rattled as the heating mechanism activated. They carried a mild metallic scent, as though they had been left to weather in the rain. On the very first night I heard it, a soft, indistinct whispering, barely audible, as if someone were conversing above me. The only catch, I was on the top floor. The initial murmurs were barely perceptible, more like a hushed whisper than coherent words. I attributed it to the wind rushing through the ventilation system, until one night, I heard it distinctly call out my name, spoken with agonizing languidness. "Jameis." I lay motionless in bed, the rain pattering against the window. Despite the warm air around me, a cold shiver traveled down my spine. The eerie whisper resounded once more, edging closer in its impatience. "You're awake." I summoned the maintenance team to address the peculiar issue. Upon investigating the vent, the man who arrived turned pale. "This vent isn't linked to the building system," he explained. "It solely leads downward into darkness." "How far does it go?" I inquired. He shook his head, the recollection making him uneasy. "I dropped my flashlight in there. It never hit the bottom." That night, I conjured up a dream where I stood in my room, staring at the vacant hole in the wall. Slowly, something pale and damp began to crawl upwards from the darkness within. Its eyes. These tales have a way of making one contemplate the essence of our living spaces. The walls, the floors, the concealed corners that remain untouched for years. Yet sometimes, it's not the place itself that harbors menace. Our next narrative unfolds in the realm of a bus route that predominantly operates during the night. A route that the majority of city dwellers have grown increasingly reluctant to traverse. This particular bus stood out. No distinguishing marks, devoid of a route number or a company logo. The bus appeared to be quite antiquated, the windows coated with a layer of dust that seemed impervious to any attempt to clean them. It was whispered that the bus made its only appearance after midnight, each time accompanied by a downpour. One particular night, I found myself stranded in the torrential rain, and my rideshare app refused to cooperate. It was then that the bus materialized. Its dim yellow headlights cutting through the torrent, the interior of the bus exuded a peculiar scent, a hint of earthy dampness alongside the sweet fading fragrance of decaying flowers. The bus seats, though worn and tattered, bore the subtle imprints of someone having recently occupied them. Amongst the passengers in the bus, there were only two others. They sat perfectly motionless, their gazes fixed forward, neither of them displaying the slightest signs of respiration. The intensity of the rain escalated with the passing moments, accompanied by a notable change in the cityscape beyond the window. The streets appeared narrower, more labyrinthine, their structures warped as if the environment itself skewed and shifted. Despite the eeriness, the driver never deviated his gaze, only uttering the cryptic phrase, "Not yet, not yet." Once the bus came to a halt, I hurriedly stood up. The two additional passengers slowly turned their heads to gaze fixatedly in my direction, their mouths slightly agape, as if longing to speak. Entities exist to reflect the world back at us, but mirrors possess a unique power. They hold the capacity to open gateways to realms not meant for human eyes. This tale unfolds within the confines of a hotel room, where the mirror in question deviated from its ordinary nature. The hotel exuded an antique ambiance, its interior adorned with lavish velvet drapes and furnished with brass keys, eschewing modern keycard technology. I was assigned room 407, situated on the top floor and located at the end of the corridor. Upon entering my room, the first thing that caught my attention was the mirror. An oversized, imposing piece positioned right across from the bed, a reflection that seemed impossible to avoid. During the night, the steady patter of rain against the windows served as a subtle backdrop, but what disturbed my sleep was the faint sounds of movement. I jolted upright in bed, a chilling dread seeping into my bones. The mirror, softly lit by the dim glow from outside, revealed my own silhouette, but amidst the shadows, another figure loomed in the corner of the reflected room. Turning my head to confirm my fears, I discovered nothing in the corner itself. But when my gaze returned to the mirror, the figure stood closer, a woman dressed in a dark cloak, her face concealed just enough to hide her eyes. Her still hands hung like lifeless weights at her sides as she took another eerily silent step forward. It wasn't a scream that echoed through the room. It was a whisper, a sound so faint it felt like it was intended only for me. The mirror shivered as if reacting to a breath that misted the glass. Then, with an uncanny swiftness, the woman's foot passed through the reflection, treading into the room. In a panic, I yanked the blanket over my head, my heart pounding in my ears. When I finally braved a peek under the covers, the mirror lay empty once more. The third consecutive night was marked by a relentless downpour, the rain's rhythmic drumming creating a constant melancholic symphony against the glass. The world around appeared as if wrapped in a watery haze, with streetlights casting elongated reflections off the damp surface. Arriving home, my attention was immediately drawn to the unexpected object resting upon the doorstep, a package of plain appearance, devoid of any identifying markers. The parcel, now soaked through at its borders, was surprisingly lightweight as I scooped it up. However, within its depths, a soft shifting sound was faintly discerned. Inside the rain-soaked parcel, an old, tattered rag doll was revealed. With its crude face and broken eye, it exuded a sense of neglect and solitude. The mildew-scented fabric seemed to whisper tales of abandonment. Initially, I laid the doll on the kitchen counter, intending to dispose of it the following day. Yet as the night progressed, the sound of soft footsteps pierced through my slumber. Their slow, drawn-out rhythm, like a muffled heartbeat, was standing, its diminutive fabric limbs hanging loosely. Yet its stitched head was tilted upward, almost as though it was aware of my exact location. With a sudden flicker, the lights in the room flickered, and in the next instant, the doll vanished. Upon waking the next morning, my gaze returned to the kitchen counter, only to discover the doll once again situated where I had left it. This time, however, a distinct damp handprint marred the surface, a haunting reminder of a presence that was undeniably not mine. The woods surrounding my town possessed an uncanny tranquility, a stillness that felt out of place. As I stepped across the threshold, a dense silence enveloped me, an absence of sound that seemed to muffle even the most subtle noises. At the age of 17, I accepted a dare from a friend to traverse the entire path at night. Rumors about the area had circulated, tales of individuals who returned altered and the ones who never returned at all. The initial 10 minutes were comparatively uneventful. with the moon casting a pale light and the biting cold numbing my senses. As I advanced, a sight that defied reason materialized before me. A man-like figure, standing in the middle of the trail, his towering form brushing against the low-hanging branches of nearby trees. However, it was the figure's disconcerting visage that caught my attention, its head wrenched into a natural position, facing me with unblinking eyes that seemed almost lifeless. The creature glided silently towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural, as though controlled by invisible strings. Each step it took created a sense of increasing heaviness in the air, making it increasingly challenging to draw in a breath. I finally staggered out of the woods, the abrupt surge of sound assaulting my senses. The wind, the rain, my ragged inhalations. My friend waited with a bewildered expression in his car. He insisted that over 2 hours had elapsed since my journey, yet my watch claimed only 20 minutes had passed. I swore never to return to the woods, yet occasionally, when solitude embraced the night, the deafening silence found its way into my thoughts, and I couldn't shake the chilling sense that the tall, unearthly figure was lurking close by, silently waiting. Some locales have the power to leave an indelible mark on you, even if you manage to escape untouched. As a child, I recall my grandmother possessing an elaborate mirror, meticulously crafted and framed in dark wood. Carved along the edges were vine-like tendrils adorned with delicate blossoms. She sternly warned me not to cast my gaze upon the mirror's surface for extended periods, and, above all, cautioned me never to engage in conversation with it. It was to be expected that curiosity would take root, like an unruly weed, upon being warned against indulging in a certain behavior. One overcast afternoon, as my grandmother slumbered upstairs, I stood before that ominous mirror. Initially, what appeared in the reflection was my own image, a pale face framed by disheveled hair. The longer I stared, the more disconcerting it became, as the lighting in the reflection diverged from the hallway's reality. The shadows in the mirror were more pronounced, shrouding the scene in an ominous intensity. I couldn't help but break my grandmother's warning, whispering softly, "Can you hear me?" To my horror, the reflection's smile broadened, even though my own mouth remained closed. My reflection's hands pressed against the glass. As rain intensified, pummeling the roof, a faint, imperceptible sound echoed in my thoughts. "Let me out." The hallway's lights flickered momentarily, plunging the space into darkness. In this fleeting moment, I thought I saw her fingers emerge from the mirror's glass surface, like tendrils breaching the barrier between worlds. I frantically rushed to my grandmother's room, recounting tales of the enigmatic girl in the mirror. To my astonishment, she reacted only with anger, promptly covering the cursed object with a sheet. Later that night, I jolted awake to the sound of fabric stirring. The sheet had vanished. From the shadows at the foot of my bed, a familiar silhouette materialized. That slow, deliberate smile graced her face once more. Despite my grandmother removing the mirror to the attic, the specter of the girl continued to plague me. Occasionally, I would catch glimpses of her within shop windows, or the reflections of darkened glass during mirrors can sometimes be gateways to realms beyond our own, but on occasion, it's the entity on the other side that first seeks entry. This narrative takes us back to the woods once more, not for the haunting secrets concealed within the dense forestry, but rather for the unsettling presence that may follow you upon your departure from this eerie realm. As I walked through the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Each time I looked over my shoulder, there was nothing there, just the shifting shadows of the trees, swayed by the breeze. But the unease remained, a gnawing sense that something was following me, just out of sight. I quickened my pace, hoping to reach the edge of the forest as fast as possible. My heart raced and each breath came in short, ragged gasps. Every snap of a twig beneath my feet seemed unusually loud, the quiet forest magnifying every sound. Each rustling leaf or distant animal cry made me jump, my senses heightened with fear. Despite the adrenaline coursing through my body, I couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness. The woods seemed to go on forever, the trees forming a dense canopy that blotted out the moonlight. My imagination began to play tricks on me. Every shadow took on a menacing shape, every breeze a chilling touch. I was certain I could hear footsteps just behind me, light, quick, and silent. Yet each time I turned around, nothing was there. My legs ached with exhaustion, but I forced myself to keep going, pushing my exhausted body to its limits. The rain began to fall, a heavy drizzle that clung to my clothing and turned the path beneath my feet into a slippery, muddy mess. I could barely make out the path ahead, the thick foliage blocking my vision. Panic flared within me as I realized I couldn't remember how long I'd been walking, or even where the exit was. It felt as though the forest was never ending, trapping me within its tangled grasp. I had been walking for what seemed like hours, my mind clouded with fear and desperation. The rain continued to fall, turning the ground beneath me into a treacherous mire. My breathing grew labored, each breath a struggle. As I pushed through the thick foliage, the path seemed to stretch on endlessly, a twisting, never-ending maze. I tried to quiet my racing mind, straining to listen for any sign of civilization beyond the confines of the oppressive forest. But all I heard was my own haggard breathing. My legs buckled as I slipped in the mud for what felt like the 100th time, sending me sprawling into the damp earth. I cursed under my breath, trying to ignore the scrapes and cuts that stung from the sharp twigs and stones. With a great effort, I managed to stand, leaning heavily on a nearby tree trunk for support. My head spun from fatigue, and the world around me seemed to blur. I had to push on. I forced myself to stagger forward, stumbling over roots that seemed to stretch across the path just to trip me. The rain continued to fall, its cold, relentless beat a constant companion. My clothes were now soaked through, and I shivered uncontrollably, my teeth chattering so hard I thought they might break. Panic flooded through me as I realized the futility of my situation. I was hopelessly lost, the forest seeming to swallow me whole as it had countless others before. I tried to slow my breathing, to calm the chaotic thoughts racing through my mind, but the shadows around me only deepened, the trees closing in like a prison cell. I felt trapped, the panic clawing at the edges of my consciousness, urging me to give in. I forced myself to focus on the present, to block out the overwhelming sense of dread that threatened to consume me. One foot in front of the other, I told myself. One step at a time, I pressed on, each step more laborious than the last. My legs felt like lead, every muscle screaming in protest. My vision began to blur, the world blending together in a dizzying kaleidoscope. I fought the urge to collapse, knowing that if I stopped, I might not have the strength to start again. I reached out blindly, grasping at the trees to steady myself. Their rough bark scraped against my skin, but I didn't care. I had to keep moving. I don't know how long I continued on like this, staggering and stumbling through the darkness. Time seemed to lose all meaning, each second stretching into an eternity. My world had shrunk to the sounds of my labored breathing and the relentless beat of the rain. Every fiber of my being ached, but I refused to give up. I clung to the fading hope that, somehow, I would find my way out of this nightmarish forest. My mind became a hazy blur, my thoughts slipping in and out of focus like a fever dream. The world around me warped and twisted, shadows dancing in the corners of my vision. My body was pushed to its absolute limit. I could feel my heart racing, every beat a painful thump against my ribcage. As I struggled to keep moving, I started to hear voices in the distance, faint whispers that seemed to beckon me forward. At first, I thought it was my imagination, just a product of my exhaustion-addled mind. But as I stumbled closer, the whispers grew louder, words taking shape in the air like phantoms. Help me? I stopped in my tracks, my head reeling from the combination of fatigue and the unexpected voices. Was someone really out there, pleading for aid? I listened intently, trying to ignore the pounding of my heart in my ears. The words were clearer now, a desperate plea echoing through the forest. Please, anyone. My mind raced, my weariness briefly forgotten as adrenaline flooded my body. Someone was in trouble, and every instinct screamed at me to find them. Despite the overwhelming exhaustion that threatened to overtake me, I forced myself to move, drawn towards the source of the voice. My feet, now numb with cold and exhaustion, moved mechanically, carrying me forward despite every muscle in my body's protest. The rain continued to fall, and the voices became slightly more distinct, still faint, but closer now. I'm stuck, even in my weary state. My mind latched onto the words, hope fluttering within my chest at the realization that the person, whoever they were, was nearby. I pushed forward, each step a monumental effort as every fiber of my being screamed for rest. But the thought that I might find someone in need kept me moving. Please. Find me. The words seemed to wash over me, a desperate plea cutting through the rain and the exhaustion that threatened to drown me. Someone was out there, lost and calling for help. I gritted my teeth, summoning the last shreds of my strength to press on. The darkness seemed denser here, the trees like black fingers clawing at the night sky. But there was something else, a faint, pale glow, barely visible through the undergrowth. I squinted through the darkness, trying to focus on the faint glow that danced in the distance. Was it a hallucination? A trick of my tired brain? I stumbled towards it, my legs feeling heavy and unresponsive. As I drew closer, the light became slightly brighter, a pale, almost ethereal glow that beckoned me forward, despite the exhaustion that seemed to drag me down with every step. I pushed on, the pale glow growing brighter with each staggering stride. It was almost like a lure, drawing me closer to it with an urgency that overrode my bone-deep weariness. I had no idea what was waiting for me in the clearing ahead, but a gut feeling told me I needed to find out. The air felt heavy as I approached the tree line. Expectant, thick, my heart thumped wildly, both from exhaustion and the anticipation building within me. The pale glow was now bright enough that I could make out shapes amongst the foliage. I drew in a shaky breath, pushing through a final stand of trees and stumbling out into a small clearing. My eyes took in the scene before me, and my heart seemed to stop for a moment. There, in the center of the clearing, a figure stood. They were partially hidden by a large tree, their features obscured in shadow. A mixture of emotions warred within me: fear, confusion, exhaustion, hope. Was this the person who had been calling for help? I took a tentative step forward, my eyes fixed on the figure standing before me. Despite the shadows that obscured their features, there was something distinctly human about them. "Hello," I called out, my voice betraying the exhaustion that coursed through me. The figure twitched, then slowly turned to face me. I squinted, trying to distinguish features in the dark. The figure was slender and feminine, though the shadows cast by the trees made it difficult to discern any more details. But there was something off. Their body seemed too still, too rigid. I took another cautious step forward, ignoring the alarm bells going off in my head. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice betraying my own fatigue. The figure remained silent, but now that I was closer, I could see something unsettling about their stance. It was almost mannequin-like, the way their limbs hung limply at their sides, the way their head tilted just a fraction too far. "Can you hear me?" I asked, my heart starting to race as I took another step closer. The figure didn't respond, but the eerie resemblance to a mannequin became more pronounced now that I was mere feet away from them. Their limbs were too still, their stance too rigid. Fear gripped me, yet I couldn't tear my gaze from the figure. I inched closer still, my exhaustion momentarily forgotten as my instincts screamed at me to back away. I was now within arm's reach of the figure, and the unease that had been building within me surged to a fever pitch. It was like looking at a life-size doll, its limbs frozen in an uncanny mannequin-like pose. I extended a trembling hand, my fingers hovering just above the figure's shoulder, hesitant to touch it, yet unable to back away. With a deep breath, I forced myself to gently touch the figure's shoulder. The moment my fingertips made contact, a frisson of fear shot down my spine. The skin felt wrong, too cool, too smooth, not at all like the skin of a living person. A wave of realization washed over me. This wasn't a person in need. This was something unnatural. As I stared deep into the depths of the shadowed face, I realized with horror that the figure before me wasn't alive. It was a mannequin, its body constructed to mimic a human form. I stumbled backward, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. This was no accident, no lost wanderer. Someone had placed this thing here, had tried to lure me into this clearing,